made during the meeting that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. So with that, we're straight into the agenda, and we have apologies. We have one from Bruce Robertson, who's unfortunately detained in Invercargill, and we have Councillor White online as well. Do I have a mover and a second for that apology? Thank you, Councillor Scott. Second, Councillor Winters. I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Against, carried. Public forum. No one has wished to speak to us today. Items not on the agenda. Mr. Taylor, there are none. Order of business will remain as the order of business on the agenda. Are there any declarations of interest of any items on the agenda by any members? There are none. Public excluded business to be transferred into the open. At this point, there are none, but some items might be up to the CEO to determine that they can go into open at some point in time. Minutes to be confirmed. So we do have the minutes of the 6th of March in our agenda. Are there any questions, queries, corrections with regard to those minutes? I do note that meeting was chaired by Bruce Robinson. While I was in attendance, I had COVID.
So, Mr. Chairman, should Bruce be signing them or yourself?
Any member attending can move and second them, is that correct? So,
thanks, Jenny.
While I'm chairing this meeting, we can confirm them. So, any questions, queries? If not, do we have a mover and a seconder to move them? Thank you, Councillor Scott. Second, Councillor Van Dardelston. There's no further discussion. I'll put that. All in favour say aye. Against, carried. So we now move on to the first report, which is the Chairperson's report presented by Matt Taylor, General Manager of Corporate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everybody. The Chairperson's report is the standard format we have for the committee with the forward-looking and backward-looking work programme for members to consider. Nothing else to add to the report, Mr. Chair.
Questions with regard to both of those current work programs. Is there anything else the team wish to add to that from the back? The only question I'd have if something out of the ordinary arose, which can happen in the current operating environment, particularly with maybe new government legislation, we're adaptive to that.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So, these are our standing items we have from previous meetings, but as you say, they can always be added to.
If there's no questions, could we have a mover and a seconder for the receipt of that report? Thank you, Chair Doug. And do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Winters. If there's no further discussion, I'll put that. All in favour say aye. Against, carried. Moving on to page 20. We have the Audit New Zealand report on the audit of the Bay Plenty Regional Council for year end 30 June. And welcome Kamaran and Warren Goslett from Audit New Zealand. Welcome, Warren. I'll ask Kamaran to present this.
Chair and committee members. So this report is essentially providing the committee an insight into the audit process for the 30 June 23 annual report. And the report's attachment, which is Audit New Zealand's management report, it outlines the audit findings, recommendations, and prioritizes those audit findings as either urgent, necessary, or beneficial. In relation to a summary of those audit findings and the prioritization of those findings, there's a total of 7 recommendations that are prioritized as open and necessary. At the bottom of page 21 of your agenda, there's a table that summarizes the various different categories of those findings and the status of those. 3 new actions or recommendations were raised as outlined in attachment 1, the management report, and categorized as necessary. There are 9 previous recommendations, of which 5 are closed and 4 remaining open. So that's in essence a summary of the management report content, and happy to take any questions on that, either from a management perspective or from Audit New Zealand's perspective with Warren present today.
Warren, did you wish to add anything at this point in time?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just think it's important to note that if you look at the recommendations, 5 were closed in 2023. That was with a lot of work between myself and Audit New Zealand and management, which is a real good sign that working together we are closing these recommendations over a period of time.
Thank you. And I think from memory, I did note that sensitive expenditure also has some commentary and confidential as part there, which always seems to be, from my life, local government, Warren, it's always been, and as it should be, an issue to keep on top of. Okay, councillors, committee, are there any questions of probably the live ones still in action, or any commentary on the closed ones that you may have? Councillor Winters.
Oh, just on page 25, the net revaluation increase of 14.8 million for the rivers and drainage. So is that because of all the assets that we have, the capital works that we've done on rivers and drainage in the past 3 years? Because I struggle with an increase in revaluation because you can't sell them. I mean,
So that's a combination, councillor, of the existing asset base and the cost to replace the existing asset base, and in addition, any new assets that have been included as part of that revaluation cycle. So it's looking at the cost to replace those assets and the index increase in the cost components for those assets that's resulting in the increase in the valuation. Those will be one of the key drivers for that increase.
so that affects our insurance premium?
It does. Yes, it does. It's one of the components that's factored into by the insurers when looking at insurance premiums, along with data integrity and the risks associated with maintaining those assets.
On the issue of procurement, and I noticed in the report we use basically a series of guidelines rather than a policy, and I understand that's up for review. Whereabouts are we with that? You know, procurement is a critical part, or how we go about procurement is a critical part of our business. So I'm not sure who's dealing with that. Annabelle, is that you? Aaron, sorry. Would you like to come forward? And could you give us an update, if I've read that correctly, as to where you see a potential policy heading over the next 12 months, when it will go to, I'm assuming, policy and strat? And are we going to maintain a guideline perspective or go to a policy perspective?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not too sure on that one. We're in the middle of doing our procurement review at the moment. Fieldwork's wrapping up, but we've still got to tease out where to go from there. What we're doing is having a look at what we do in terms of procurement guidance lined up against good practice from OAG and government guidance, what have you. But we're not ready to sort of comment on that just yet. But it is in progress.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, maybe I could give some clarification on the guidelines. There are rules around procurement as well as guidelines. So the guidelines are around the best practice and the better way of doing procurement, but there are rules over seeking tenders, financial delegation rules. So there are clear rules in place as well as the guidelines to help managers do better procurement.
Other questions of probably the action still in play? Councillor Van Dardilson.
Just in the report on page 10 of the actual report, talks about impact of flooding events. And I just wonder what we've done as an audit and risk committee to ensure that we've got the correct risk mitigation with regards to past and future weather events. And that raises the issue as to whether potential litigation should be on our risk register.
That's a good point. So we've have the risk register coming up later on in the agenda. Did you have any comment, any of the team on that from our risk specialists at this point, or we can discuss it later when it comes up as part of looking at our key risks on the register?
Because we have two items on the agenda further on, maybe that would be the right time, Mr. Chair, to talk about it in the key risks or on the flood mitigation report as well.
Any other questions? If not, we do have a recommendation that we receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Van Dardilson. Second, Councillor Scott. Is there any further questions? If not, I'll put that. All in favour, say aye. Against, carried. Moves us on to the second Audit New Zealand report with regard to the audit of the LTP and consultation document on page 50. Byron and Warren.
Thank you, Chair. So this report outlines the scope of the audit review carried out on Council's LTP consultation document and supporting documentation. It also highlights that an unmodified opinion was issued along with an emphasis of matter, with the emphasis of matter essentially talking about bringing to the attention of the reader around uncertainties around the capacity for council to deliver on its capital program based on past trends. Those were some of the key highlights of that audit process. The report also sets out the audit plan and the focus areas for the audit plan. And in addition to that, a review of the assumptions underpinning the financial forecast and the reasonableness of the financial strategy and the alignment of the infrastructure strategy and asset management plans to the financial strategy. In addition to that, the report also highlights two key assumptions that were raised by audit as either challenging or important to emphasize, one of which is the capital delivery on the capital program, and the other is climate change. So that in essence is the outline of what the report highlights. And in terms of next steps for the LTP process, auditor currently on site carrying out the final audit, taking into consideration the outcomes of the deliberations meeting on the 20th of May and factoring those decisions into any changes that are being programmed into the final LTP for consideration for adoption on the 26th of June.
Warren, did you wish to add anything?
Mr. Chair, that was well articulated by Kumaran. Nothing else to add and happy to take questions.
Okay, committee. Well, first of all, I felt our consultation document was superb. There was some challenging item in there. And many of us around this table have seen numerous consultation documents. So I felt in association with Audit New Zealand, because I know you had a lot of input in one particular matter, it was very well done. Any other questions, queries, statements, observations with regard to that or the audit plan moving forward? Any questions about the matter of interest? In terms of the CapEx program, always a challenge to deliver. They're often subject to either resource consents, land purchase, in some cases, and other obstacles that are in the way to deliver it. So it's never easy. And to get a 70+% delivery, particularly in today's and contracting, is pretty good. But it is an issue always raised here by a particular councillor, as it should be, about that, because often you may be rating for a particular program and you're not utilising it. So there is an argument you could be overrating at some point in time, or you might be borrowing. So it's a balance, isn't it, to get that right. Chair Doug?
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to say, sometimes we look at the negative as opposed to positive. So in terms of a couple of capital projects this year, if you take the Rangitaiki River, the old Rangitaiki River channel, I mean, that was delivered on time and in budget. And then the variation in terms of delivery, in terms of the spillway on the Rangitaiki River, that was a variation to the capital project. So, I don't think they're all bad. What we need to understand is the reasons why the variations is there.
Any other commentary on this particular paper? If not, we've got a recommendation there to receive this report and attachment. So moved by Councillor Van Velderson. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Scott. If there's no further questions, I'll put that. All in favour say aye. Against, carried. The next paper is the rates setting for 24-25 in terms of legal compliance. Very important. You don't want to get this wrong. It can cause havoc. We have one job. Yes, so we have Mark Alacrom here to assist us through this paper.
Members of the committee, this particular report essentially outlines providing the committee with an insight on and a status update on what is an annual process that we carry out in advance of any rate setting for council, whether that's an annual plan or a long-term plan. In this case, it's the long-term plan process. So essentially, this is a focus of doing seeking external legal advice on the mechanisms that are used to bring to council at the time of adoption, which essentially entails your rating recommendations for setting the rates and the funding impact statement, which is a key document that supports the setting of rates. That document sets out the basis for which the rates are set, the quantum and the way it's calculated, and what those rates are being applied for. So those documents are all subject to the external review process, which is currently underway and anticipated to be completed ahead of the adoption meeting, so that a paper setting out those rate setting resolutions will be presented to council on the 26th of June following the adoption of the LTP to set the rates process. Also, to note as well that another key process is this is also looked at by Audit New Zealand as part of their final audit process, which is commenced, which is looking at the necessary documents that are prescribing the rate setting and the due dates for the various elements, in particular rates arrears that are collected by the local authorities, and looking at the legal advice that has been provided over that review process and how council has responded to preparing those documents in accordance with that legal advice.
Kamaran, Mark, did you wish to add? All good. Any questions? I mean, this is sort of stage one, but any questions or queries of the report? Councillor Scott.
This is really just asking for information. I'm just trying to understand the difference between the legal information. So that's about whether or not the information about what is an arrears and what are the legal rules and things, as opposed to the accounting. Because I was wondering, what are the legal requirements that are not accounting requirements?
So the recommendations will take into account, from an accounting perspective, what's set in the budget for the rates, for the basis for rates and rates collection. But the basis for which rates is collected and the rate setting process actually is set under the Local Government Act and Local Government Rating Act. And there's external advice is looking at those different mechanisms and how it's complying with the requirements of the legislation. So that's the focus of the legal requirement, the legal advice. It's more compliance check.
Obviously, we're setting our own rates now through the current LTP. There are some changes to the rating system, so that will add a little bit more complexity to what we've done historically, or how will that feed into this particular rate setting in terms of the language? And because I think one of them may well, subject to confirmation, be phased in over time. You know, that makes it even more complex.
An additional element covered in the report is a check against the parameters set in the revenue and financing policy. So that's also part of the scope of the legal review to ensure that the rates covered in the funding impact statement is in accordance with the parameters set in the revenue and financing policy. So the revenue and financing policy review process, where you've recalibrated the bands and the rating thresholds, that will govern what's covered in the funding impact statement as part of this review process.
So there is no more discussion. Councillor Winters.
Fiona will get sick of me asking this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, budget last week, there's a potential sum of money coming into us from the Kānoa Fund for rivers and drainage after the deluge. No, before the deluge. Before the deluge.
Deluge.
Yeah. We don't know what that number is yet, but we have to rate our rivers and drainages, you know, that 80-20 split before the 30th of June. And then we will get confirmation from the Crown what that number is after we've struck the rates. So it sort of worries me that we have to take we have to do it this way. There's no other way to do it until we get confirmation from the Kānoa Fund. And it's a bit like you were talking about, Mrs. Smith from Mātua. We have to rate everybody, but there is a potential income from the Crown to offset those rates. Is there another way of doing it? Because I just, you know, we have to rate our community to pay for these schemes. Yep, we got to do the work. But the Crown has signalled, don't know what, that they will help us. Is there another way of doing it?
Three, Mr. Chairman. So we do believe the information is imminent from the Crown. So as well as the announcement, we are awaiting the specifics of the announcement. How much, how is that funding going to be applied, grant, equity, for example. So we are waiting for those specifics, but that is imminent. So we should be able to update councillors this week on what's actually going to happen. So probably not in a position to answer that question today, but we do hope to get confirmation from the Crown on amount and conditions and everything else that Fiona's been updating you on soon. It is bad timing that it didn't happen a couple of months ago. That would have been great for the long-term plan and for rate setting, but we have to work with budget, and the budget was on the 30th of May, and we're trying to work with the information we do have and wait for the imminent announcement of the specifics around that.
So are we flexible enough, Matt, that if an announcement is pending before we adopt the final rates on the 26th of June, that we can change our rating system, and is it legal based on that information, confirmation from the Crown? I'm sort of tossing up.
Yes.
You know, how do we make sure we're flexible enough through our rating system that we can?
Yes, and as this report shows, we have a very clear legislative process we have to go through with audit, with external legal review before council can adopt on the 26th. So all of those steps, we have a closing window at the moment of, we'll get to a date where it will be too late to affect that decision, but that window is still slightly open at the moment. So we're working to hopefully get the confirmation we need now, so that before the window closes, that can affect rates. But at the moment, we're running out of time.
Thank you. Are there any more questions with regard to the rate setting procedures? If not, we have some recommendations on page 68 that we received the report. And note the external review in the rate setting process. I'm happy to move that. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Chair Doug. If there's no further discussion, I'll put that all in favour, say aye, against, carried. Thanks, Tamara and Mark. So we're now moving on to a couple of internal audit work plans and reviews. And we've got Aaron coming up to introduce the first one, which is the internal work program for 24-25 and through to 26-27.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So the work program that we've put forward covers the next 3 years. It covers what we will do for the first year of the program and what we might do for the other 2 years. It's, you know, what's on our radar, basically. That does change depending on requirements for assurance. The program was put together through a look at press register, commentary through the various RAC meetings last year, commentary, a discussion with the LT and some of the appropriate senior managers. It's been endorsed by LT and it's now presented for review and feedback and approval. Any questions or comments on the program?
First of all, I commend you on looking at the risk register to guide us in terms of what our priorities are with regard to internal audits. I just one that comes to mind because it was pertinent in our LTP conversations was strategic framework implementation review. Have you got in mind what that might take and how you may wish to go about that?
Not yet. As you'll see in this, there's a whole lot of high-level objective statements. When we come to do the review, that's when we scope it out in detail and go, what do we actually need to look at? And that's where you go through a process where we have to look at what does the sponsoring GM need out of this, what's feedback we had through RAC, what's the relevant framework or guidance to hang the audit on, that sort of thing, including do we do it internally or not. That's why scoping is quite a process, and you'll see it's not all the other audits scoped, but that's what we do. For the meantime, right now, no, but happy to take input.
You may want to consider some feedback from elected members in terms of their response in terms of the LTP. It was aligned. I mean, this is a much broader subject, but there was some quite intense conversation around what our priorities should be in terms of that and other frameworks. Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 82, the appendix to the work program, it talks about asset management planning being a red light, and was last done in 2018-19. Now, asset management planning, I would have thought, was one of our key critical components, and I wonder, you know, how long has it flashed red, and what's your level of confidence of moving it out of that red risk rating?
Sure. Through you, Chair. The risk rating is it's not really a risk rating as such. We don't think there's a big risk in this area. It's actually a risk ranking of how important is the subject. So if you look on page 81 of your agenda, you'll see there's the risk ranking there. And basically we classify them by how important is this thing to council. So for example, for a risk ranking of A, which is red, it's a business critical functional process. It's large value or high risk, potentially. There could be newer changed systems or processes and various things, but high transactional value. So given that we've got a lot of pretty high criticality assets, particularly around, you know, things to stop rivers overflowing, what have you, that's why we indicatively rank it that way. It's not a reflection of we think we've got a problem in that area right now, because until we do the audit, don't really know.
Just to add to that, of course, external audit review asset management planning is part of the long-term plan. So this internal audit that Aaron's talking about would complement the work that then feeds into the adoption of asset management plans for your long-term plan. So the asset management planning is reviewed very heavily by the external auditors. They audit the asset management plans, which you will receive for adoption on the 26th of June as part of the long-term plan. And the work that Aaron's doing is to supplement the systems that then end up being the asset management plans for audit. So that's why it's significant, because of our assets as an organisation, but also why it's on the internal audit programme for 24-25. And any learnings from that will then be built into the system for us for our next long-term plan, asset management planning. So it will be early enough, if it's done in 24-5, to feed into our internal asset management planning.
Thanks, Chair. It's related to the comments related to this paper as well as the next one, which is essentially the service you're providing to the Opotiki District Council. So essentially, you're becoming a professional advisor to that council. And whilst the work you're doing around the assurance program needs to be signed off by the Audit and Risk Committee, and you've, as professional advisors do, provided a disclaimer, I'll put it in the words of a disclaimer, what is the risk of Audit New Zealand raising issues that they might not be happy with in relation to the advice we're giving them? Or is it not material?
The classic auditor catch-all. I'm not sure, Chair. We do have, like any professional services firm, which we're not, because we're not a for-profit, we do have a fairly extensive terms and conditions document, which is like an engagement letter, but it's not, because we're not a firm. And that covers out where liability lays and who take risks for what. We're providing, I guess, help to accounts who kind of can't, it's limited in resourcing. So in terms of securing KPMG or something for some of its reviews may not be that feasible at this stage. But it's all purely advisory. I'm not sure that we would incur risk in this area. Any auditor always runs the risk that they have a different opinion from another auditor, but that's just part of the job.
Oh, Chair, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't do it, because I think this is part of the partnership we have, but it does raise the issue that if we're providing this service, and you made the mention that is essentially offsetting the internal costs of our audit risk function, the moment you start charging for a fee for service, there is that issue that if Audit New Zealand then audit their risk assurance program, we just need, in my view, we just need to be aware of it.
Yes, and through you, Mr. Chair, the liaison we do with external audit so that they're aware of the separation and the overlap. I believe that the work that our internal audit team will give assurance and confidence to the external audit team at Opotiki that this internal audit work is going on, whoever provides it, whether it was an external firm or Bay of Plenty Regional Council. It's not of a scale at the moment that gives any issues of liability to the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. We'd look at that very closely. At the moment, we're looking to build capacity and understanding so that that council can have its own internal audit program, which it doesn't at the moment. So it's having a program, then resourcing it accordingly as they step into the space of doing internal audit. And it may be that we'll be supporting them in future. It may be that we're not. They may look for external firms, as Aaron says. So it's not of a scale to give us concern at the moment. And we're being sure that external audit, and it's the same external auditors, Audit New Zealand, that we have, that we would make sure there would be no overlap or no concerns from them. And I think the opposite would be true, that they would get assurance in the fact that internal audit work is going on.
Scott.
Yes, I was interested in the number of audit areas that hadn't had any audit in the past. Is that sort of like in the past few years, or is that ever? Which is interesting. And I suppose the second part of that is, are there areas which you've discounted as not going to be in the audit program in the next 3 years, which are in that box as well, have never been audited?
A program kind of has an element of cyclical hygiene type audits. So any audit program will have a number of things that are recurring. And then there'll be a number of more topical audits that are of interest to the senior staff, or, it's pertinent to what's going on at the moment. So yes, there will be elements of council operation that won't be audited for some time, but we do review it all and kind of target our audit resource in terms of criticality. I've got an organisation this big. We can look at this much each year. Some of it we need to do cyclically because it's good corporate hygiene, like sensitive expenditure or asset management planning, because these things need to be looked at more often. Whereas Grable management, it's good to look at it once and then probably leave it alone for a while. And that's how we approach the program.
Yes, I can understand things not being, you hadn't had a look at for a while. I'm thinking about some of the things that are organisationally critical that have apparently never been looked at. And so that's great. So they're now being looked at. And I'm just interested, what are the things, are there any of those that may have been critically important that you said not this time around?
Nothing springs to mind.
And just to reiterate the point around this is internal audit. So external audit is complementary to that and does cover all of the gambit of council expenditure and activities. So the internal audit prioritisation is around the things that have the most benefit for internal processes and systems that work. You've got to look at the external audit work that goes on that does review all expenditure and all transactions of the council as well.
Yeah, so just to confirm, there's nothing that you thought was critically important, was organisationally critically important that you thought should be had a look at for the next 3 years?
No, because any of those things, when Aaron brings the report to the leadership team, we add things to the programme or move things out which are less critically important, but it does come down to prioritisation. And of course, if we had 10 auditors instead of one, we would maybe do 10 times the amount of work, but we have set the work programme for the resources and capacity that we have within the team that feels appropriate to deliver the work programme that is in the priority areas that are here. So we have the priority areas and we have the capacity to deliver those.
I could add one further thing to that. There is such a thing as over audit for an organisation. In my experience, that there's a sweet spot where you do a certain number of audits, the organisation can handle that much and they can close the audit points. You could do 3-4 times as much audit, but then it bogs down and nothing ever gets completed.
Councillor Nees.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the Holidays Act audit that you've proposed for year 2 of the long-term plan. It's 2015-16 since we looked at that. I just wanted to double check. This is not about how we calculate leave balances with regard to the Holidays Act, because it was a situation about 5 years ago, where very many organisations got that wrong. So I'm just checking it's not about that. It's just about other processes that we may use around the Holidays Act. It's just that some organisations have ended up with a very large liability because their calculations were wrong. So I just wanted some assurance that if it was about miscalculation, then should we be bringing it forward to this financial year?
Thank you, through you, Chair. The scope of that hasn't been set, but it is essentially looking at, are we compliant with the Holidays Act properly, noting that we did get a review done those number of years ago. This is a sense check in terms of a corporate hygiene review, not because we think there's an issue, it's more, let's just have a look just in case. But there's no burning platform at present that I'm aware of.
Thanks,
I guess the other thing to bear in mind on that too is that there's potential legislative change in that area, so it might make that more topical.
It has caused many organisations a lot of issues over the years and their understanding of the legislation. So thank you for that. Any further questions? If not, colleagues, we have a recommendation on page 72, which receives a report and approves the work program for the next 3 years. We have a mover. Thank you, Councillor Scott. Seconder, thank you, Councillor Winters. And there can be some flex in there if something extraordinary crops up, which often does. If there's no further discussion, I'll put that on in favour, say aye. Against, carried. We now move on to the internal status report in terms of audit. And again, Aaron's prepared this.
Thank you, Chair. Because this is a fairly straightforward update, I'd be happy to take this one as read and just invite any questions or comments at this time.
Any questions or queries on what we have completed or the status, I should say, of those? Okay, we have a recommendation then on page 96.
Pretty move.
Dallison, I'll second that. Is there any further discussion? If not, I'll put that. All in favour, say aye. Against, carried. So there's no extra business in the open section, so that concludes the open section. We have a mover and a seconder to move into public excluded and live